My name is Daniel Coyne. I'm one of the clinical professors here. I'll be your moderator for this evening. This event is sponsored by the Criminal Law Society, the Hispanic Latino Law Student Association, the Alumni Association, and the Career Services Office of Chicago-Kent College of Law, and the Women in Law Society. Tonight, what our progression of events will be, a brief couple of remarks from me. Dean Krent will come up and speak to you for a few moments and introduce Ms. Alvarez. After that, there'll be a question and answer session. We have some pre-submitted questions and answers. My understanding is some more have been submitted this evening. And then after that, there'll be a reception out in the lobby. We should be breaking here by about 6:45. And then you're all invited to mingle and network with alumni that are here that are working in the criminal law profession. With that, I'll turn it over to Dean Krent.
Welcome to all of you, and of course, welcome back to Anita Alvarez. I think it's only appropriate that Dan Coyne start this program since he's always litigating against Anita in his office, so at least they could come together in a more pacific setting this evening. Anita, as many of you know, is a graduate, 1986 graduate of our law school, and was immediately thereafter a career member in the State's Attorney's Office, representing the county of Cook in all sorts of matters that confronted the office. And she became as Assistant State's Attorney, she worked through the system, felony cases, homicide, narcotics, armed robbery, criminal sexual assault, the everyday gist of what prosecutors do in the State's Attorney's Office. In 2008, as you know, she became the first elected State's Attorney in Cook County who was female. She's also the first State's Attorney in Cook County who was a Latina. And she's focused her time of service in office, I think, on many different issues. Of particular note, a lot of initiatives against human trafficking, also issues in terms of a movement towards community-based prosecution, which I think holds a lot of interest for the future. But at the same time, she's really given back and served the profession. She served as Chicago Bar Association president. I have no idea how she became a state's attorney and became president of the Chicago Bar Association at the same time. It seemed totally crazy to me. But then decided this was so much interesting in terms of administration. She founded and then became president of the National Hispanic Criminal Bar Association at the same time. So we are just actually delighted that she spent some time to reminisce about a different building, but the same school, and also her increased involvement with criminal prosecution on the right side. No, Anita.
Well, thanks, Dean. Thanks for that introduction. And I want to thank all of you for spending the evening with me here at Chicago-Kent, although this was not the Chicago-Kent I went to. When I was in law school, it was located at Wacker and Monroe. The building was an old office building that was converted. So this is much nicer. It's beautiful, and I think our old building it's knocked down. I think it's a parking lot now, so it doesn't even exist at all. But it's great to see all the students here tonight and some alum. I want to introduce my first assistant, Dan Kirk, who's also an alum of Kent. He did go to school in this lovely building, which is nice. But this school played a major role, obviously, in my life. And it really is the place where I fell in love with the law. You should know that when I was a student at Kent, I didn't plan when I was an undergrad to go to law school. Okay, I didn't. It was a last-minute decision on my part. I went to Loyola undergraduate. I was a social work major. I saw myself really more like going for an MSW or working somehow maybe in a probation department. That's kind of where I saw myself. And at the last minute, I made that decision to take that LSAT and to apply. So I applied here, and I was lucky to get accepted. And I say that because I think if I applied today, I may not get accepted. I think the standards are much higher, and so for that, I always say that I am always indebted to Chicago-Kent for, in my opinion, taking a chance on me and giving me that opportunity to be able to, be here, get a law degree, and to go on with my career, because I know there were many, many, many more qualified applicants than me, and so I really, truly appreciate it. So they took a chance on me, and I hope that the school is happy with the results now that I'm where I'm at today. You know, I think that Kent, at the time that I started here, was a little ahead of its time, and I say that because one of the things that Kent always stressed, and I believe it's still true today, and that is the requirement of legal writing. Legal writing is so important, and at the time we were the only school that required all of the legal writing that Kent does, as opposed to the other law schools. And I think it's great, and the training is essential, and it's extremely important. Even if you go on to be a trial attorney like me, because I consider myself a trial attorney, you still have to know how to write, because it's not just all about getting up there and doing trials, but you also have to write motions, you have to do pleadings, and there's all the things that require the writing, and so this school is great for that. So no matter what type of law you practice, that's going to be important. Just a little bit about my background. I was born and raised here in Chicago. I grew up in the Pilsen neighborhood, so anybody out there from Pilsen, Little Village area? Anybody? Okay, that's where I'm from. Those are my roots. I come from very humble beginnings. You know, neither one of my parents had a high school education, but it was very important for them that we, their children, have a high school education, and so education was stressed. My father came here and he worked as a waiter. That was how he supported the family. My mom did not work outside the home until he passed away. My dad died when I was 12. So my mother had to go into the workforce. The only skill that she had was she was a seamstress. She could sew. It's ironic because I could barely sew a button, okay? But my mother sewed everything and anything. And that's how she supported us after my dad passed away. But despite the fact that she didn't have a high school diploma, she really, really understood how important education was, and that this would be a ticket for me and my brother and my sister to do better than her and my father did. I went on to attend Maria High School, south side of Chicago, 67th in California, and then to Loyola University here in Chicago. And I graduated from Loyola. I became the first person in my family to get a college degree. It was very exciting. And when I made this last-minute decision to go on to law school, I think even my mom was starting to wonder whether or not I was going to be able to do everything that I said I was going to do. And I do remember one memorable moment in my first semester of law school when I was literally up all night typing. Now, you guys do everything on a computer, and it's a hell of a lot easier, okay? We had those electric typewriters, all right, and whiteouts, and those little things that you have, the little strips to when you made mistakes. I'm a lousy typist, always was, till this day. I'm a horrible typist. And I remember being up all night doing a memo, and my mother went to sleep. She gets up, and the next morning I'm literally same spot at the kitchen table with that electric typewriter typing away. And she looks at me and she says, I went to bed, you're typing, I get up, you're typing. Maybe you should just marry a lawyer and not be a lawyer. And I remember saying, no, Mom, I can do this. And then she turned and, proceeded to make me a big breakfast. And she was so worried about me being all stressed out, because I was. And she was wondering, since I'm her youngest, whether or not I made the right decision. But she supported me each and every way. And I know she was very proud of me when I finished law school and I got that degree. So I think you, as students, probably have had those moments in your life as a student as to whether or not you made the right decision, right? Did you make the right decision? Because I know what it takes and how much it costs to go to law school, right? So you're probably wondering, what am I doing to myself, taking out these loans, You hear people saying out there, I've heard lawyers say, I told my son not to go to law school, forget that, don't be a lawyer. Well, I disagree. I think it's a tremendous profession. I think it's a wonderful profession. I think whatever you decide to do in law, all those sleepless nights and the stress that I know you're under are well worth it. and you'll see the rewards no matter what you choose to practice after you leave this place. So I knew slowly but surely that I was doing the right thing in law school, but I can tell you the turning point for me, because law school in many ways was culture shock for me. At Loyola, I was very active in the Latin American Student Organization. I had a core group of friends that I hung out with in the cafeteria at Loyola. And when I came to Kent, it was much different. There was only one other Hispanic in the class, and there was only one African American in my class. That was it. So the other Hispanic also happened to be a woman. Her name happened to be Alma Alvarado, and I'm Anita Alvarez. And you know what used to happen? They'd look at me and they'd say, Miss Alvarado. And she'd say, no, you know. And I'd say, no, I'm Alvarez. And they'd look at her, Miss Alvarez, no, I'm Alvarado. And I used to think there's only two of us in this class. You can't keep us apart. So it was a little culture shock for me. I felt I didn't have much in common with people around me. I knew I didn't come from the same type of background. Many of the kids here had parents who were professionals, and you know, whether lawyer, doctor, something. And so you have those feelings of insecurity, you have those feelings of not belonging, feelings like you haven't found your way. But for me, the turning point was trial advocacy. And when I took my first trial ad class, and I really, once I'm learning how to do the trial and being in court, and I really liked it, and I was finally getting compliments from professors, because otherwise I was that student who sat in the back, making sure nobody, called on me. Please, I don't know anything about contracts, don't ask me. But trial ad was different. I'm like, I can do this, and I kind of like cross-examination. This is fun. And so I think for me that was the turning point, and I think that's what kind of boosted my confidence in knowing that I can do this, I have a passion for this, and I can go on and be successful. So when I got out of law school, and at Kent, though, I must, and I'm going to talk about this because, at Kent, the opportunities in law school, when it comes to the area of criminal law, you have more opportunities on the defense side, right? I mean, it's just a reality. You have more because you have the clinic, and I worked in the clinic. I worked for Professor David Thomas. And I also worked for 2 summers for the State Appellate Defender's Office. So I was writing briefs for indigent defendants, on the other side. And so you see the other side, okay? And it seemed to have more opportunity. I didn't know when I was a second-year law student that I'd be a state's attorney. Because everything I was doing at that point was criminal defense work. But when I got out of law school, and actually my trial advocacy professor happened to be Mike Angarola, who was the first assistant state's attorney at the time. And he encouraged me to apply to the office. And I wasn't quite sure if this was really what I should do. But he encouraged me to apply, and I applied, and I know I made the right decision because I love what I do each and every day when I go into court and put my name on the record on behalf of the people of the state of Illinois. Because each and every day, me and my assistants now are dealing with people who have been through some horrific, traumatic experiences in their lives. And being able to provide some sense of justice is something that I get great satisfaction in. And I know lawyers who go on to make a heck of a lot more money than me in some big firms, respectable firms here in the city of Chicago, but they're not really happy with their job. I've always been happy with my job. And, the state's attorney's office, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, is the 2nd largest in the nation. I have over 860 assistant state's attorneys, another 500 support staff, over 100 investigators. The only other office bigger than mine is Los Angeles, and they outnumber me by maybe 100 lawyers. But statutorily, we have more duties than any other prosecutor's office in the nation because we do everything. Not only do we do our felony cases, the most serious cases, we do misdemeanors, we do child support, we do traffic across the entire county, not just the city, the entire county. So we have more responsibilities than any other office in the nation. So it's a demanding job, but it's a job that I truly love. I think the education that I got here at Kent and the preparation that I got here at Kent has prepared me to run this office and to do what I have done in court each and every day. It's been a great amazing journey. Just being in court and being able to try cases, working my way up through the system. I started like everybody else in the appellate division, wrote briefs for about a year. Then I was sent to First Municipal, doing misdemeanors, worked my way up. I was in the gang unit for 4 years, trying gang-related homicides, and then became a supervisor of the public integrity unit. And then in 2007, when my then boss decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election, I made the decision, which at that time people were scratching their heads and trying to figure out what was wrong with me, to enter the political field. It was a tough decision. It was a decision that I contemplated, and I had some great support from friends and family who encouraged me to do it. I can tell you I was discouraged by many in the so-called political experts who said, you know, first of all, who does she think she is? Where did she come from? You know, she's never been an alderman. She's never been a precinct worker. You know, who's going to vote for her? We had, you know, Dan ended up being my campaign manager, and he's never been a campaign manager before, and I was never a candidate. So that's how my campaign started. He encouraged me to run, and I said, but I've never been a candidate. And he said, you could do this, you could do this. And I'm like, well, I need a campaign manager. It's you. I've never been a campaign manager. Well, here we go. But, you know, the reason I ran is because I felt so strongly that my qualifications, my experience as a prosecutor was important. And whoever holds this position as state's attorney has tremendous power. We have the power of the grand jury. We have the power to indict. It's a tremendous power that we have, and I think that power should be in the right hands. And I really think that whoever is in this position should be someone who has experience as a prosecutor. And if you look around the country, most of the prosecutors, the DAs, whatever they call them, are career people like myself. But Cook County always has done things backwards, right? You know, it has to be a politician. But so that particular race back in 2000, and started in 2007 into 2008, I learned a lot. It was a crash course in politics, a lot of things I don't like about the political side of it. But I felt so strongly in my qualifications that, you know, I just trudged right through it. And I knew, though, when I went and spoke to groups all across this whole county that my message was resonating, and even though I didn't know I was going to win, I knew that I'd make a strong showing because I could tell when I met people out on the campaign trail that they listened and understood my qualifications. We've had several funny moments in that campaign, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of scraping of my car because I was driving myself all over the place at all crazy hours, and you know, I knocked off the side mirror one time, yeah. Twice, maybe? I don't know. But, you know, you're being told no woman has ever run for this before, no career prosecutor has ever run for this before. You know, who do you think you are? So about 2 weeks before the election, Dan was talking to someone who I can only describe as an insider in Chicago's political world and has been for years. And he said, you know, my friend was doing a poll on another race, not necessarily our race, but we decided to throw the state's attorney's race in there, just for the hell of it. We're going to throw that in there and see what happens. So Dan says, well, what did it say? What did you learn from the poll? And he goes, wow, the broad is going to win. The broad is going to win. So the broad won, okay? And so I said, one day I'm going to write a book, and that'll be the name of it. The broad is going to win. So, you know, I took all those political experts, surprised them all by winning. But I think, you know, the glass ceiling, and especially to you female students out there, you know, they say she broke the glass ceiling. There really, truly should be no glass ceiling anymore in any profession, whether it's law, medicine, whatever it be. Because we know our qualifications, we know what we can do, and you have to believe in yourself. Don't let people tell you no. Follow your heart. Do what you want to do. If this is what your calling is, whether you want to, you know, be a state's attorney, a public defender, you want to do, you know, any kind of, you know, maybe corporate law is your thing. Follow your heart and what makes you happy, and not just do it for the money. Really, you know, I think you're going to get more satisfaction out of your jobs if you follow your heart, and that would be my message to you. You know, it's a challenge each and every day, and in the criminal law world, we see all kinds of stuff, good stuff, bad stuff. So last week, we had a conviction integrity conference at Northwestern University. I created a conviction integrity unit to look at old cases, because we hear each and every day and we see, these old cases coming back, and the question about questionable and wrongful convictions. And no prosecutor wants to convict the wrong guy, okay? That doesn't do anybody any good. And then the real killer is out on the street. But we have to, as prosecutors, it's not about racking up convictions, okay? It's about doing justice. And we have to make sure, and sometimes that justice means admitting mistakes of the past. And I created the Conviction Integrity Unit for just that. And so those are types of things that we do at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to make sure that we are doing what is required when it comes to justice. And I always say that 30 years from now, whoever the state's attorney is, they're not going to be dealing with what I'm dealing with. Because what we see now with the advancement of the forensic sciences and the DNA, which didn't exist, 30 years ago, we're able to do things quicker, and we're able to make decisions or correct mistakes that were made years ago. And so I think where we're going, we're going to see more advancements when it comes to forensics. Although it's not like you see on TV, you don't get DNA results in 15 minutes, okay? It's not CSI, all right? It takes, anywhere from 8 months to sometimes a year before we get the results. But I think all of that, when you're talking about criminal law and criminal prosecution, it's important that we utilize all the tools out there. It's important that we look strong in heart at how we're trying cases, what we're doing. I'm very proud of my assistant state's attorneys. Today I was in court watching a case, a murder trial of a murder of a Chicago police officer. I was proud to see my assistant state's attorneys and the work that they're doing on that particular case, which is really a sad case. So I think, pursuing a legal career, number one, is a good thing, so don't let anybody discourage you, despite all those loans. I know it took me years to pay those loans off, but I finally paid them off. It felt good when I sent in that last payment. But it's all worth it, and I think it's an honorable profession, and I hope that some of you might consider prosecution. Maybe there's some of you out there who are clerking for us. If you are, thank you. I'm always looking for Kent grads to hire, and so I encourage you to join our office in some fashion if this is what you think you'd like to do. Even if you don't, you should come to 26th in California and see the work of not only the prosecutors but the defense attorneys as well. So you see how everything is put together. It's one thing about having your trial ed classes, but once you actually get on your feet and do it, it's a whole different story and it's a whole different feeling. And so I think it's important that you get that practical experience, and that is something that Kent teaches you. I never thought that when I started back in the office that I'd be standing up here as the state's attorney, and as a young assistant, it wasn't we have something called a dream sheet. We ask people where they want to go in the office. It was never on my dream sheet to be the state's attorney, but here I am. I'm glad that it happened. I'm happy that it happened, and I know that the experience that I gathered along the way building up to this position has prepared me well. There is one case that I tried, and it was a very high-profile case, and you guys probably you won't remember it. The professors in the room will remember it, because the victim now is, well, she would be 26 years old, and it was a little girl who was brutally raped and beaten, strangled, and suffocated in the Cabrini Green housing projects. And those of you who are not from Chicago, the Cabrini Green housing projects were at the time the worst projects in the city, and on the near north side. And this girl, this case became known as the Girl X case. And she was a 9-year-old little girl who had spent the night over at her friend's house in the same building that she lived in. And she got up in the morning to go to her grandma's apartment to get ready to go to school. the defendant lured her into his apartment on the 5th floor, where he proceeded to sexually assault her, strangle her, suffocate her with a pillow. He poured roach spray down her throat, and then he took her body and put it up on a stairwell leading up to the top of that building. Shatoya, her name is Shatoya, she was laying on that stairwell, and no one at the time that they found her expected her to survive. She was found by a janitor and then taken to Children's Memorial Hospital, where she was in a coma. She never regained, which she was a normal little girl before she experienced this abuse. I mean, when I say that, she wasn't handicapped. She had, there's nothing wrong with her, a typical 9-year-old little girl. As a result of all the injuries that she received, she is now paralyzed. She's confined to a wheelchair. She can't speak. She can't see. She has very limited movements in her arms, limited movement in her head. She miraculously survived. The offender, at the time that this occurred, the police did not know who the offender was, and this happened in January. She stayed in the hospital in a coma. They finally, through a lot of police work, were able to track down our offender in April of that year. When they did track him down, he had moved to the west side, and when they spoke to him, he gave a series of inconsistent statements. First statement saying that this little girl came on to him, and somehow this sex was consensual. He eventually admitted to the horrible things that he did to Toya. When this case, it was assigned to Bill O'Brien, who is now a judge in Skokie, and his partner is also a judge now, Joan O'Brien. When she became a judge, he asked me to step in and try this case with him, and I was honored to do it because I got to know this little girl. At the time we went to trial, she was 9 when the assault happened. She was going on 13 when the trial was commenced. And Toya cannot see, she cannot speak, right? And we're going to try this case, and now I'm going to do all kinds of lawyer stuff with you law students. And the question became, could we put her on the stand? How are we going to put her on the stand? There's a very special way that you speak to Shatoya, and there's a very special way that she communicates back to you. And it had never been used in a court of law ever again. And ever before. She speaks to you through her eyes. Okay, she speaks through her eye movements, and there's a system that was developed by the speech pathologist, because once Shatoya came out of the coma, she was sent to the rehab center, and the speech pathologist worked with her to create a way for her to communicate. So she speaks through her eyes, and it's called the eye gaze system. And what the eye gaze system is they take the alphabet and they break it down into 3 sections: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And when you talk to Shatoya, she speaks through her eyes by a yes. If you ask her a yes or no question, she looks up, that's yes. If you ask her, and if the answer is no, she'll look down, that's no, and she can shake her head a little. So you can ask her a yes, no. There's no confusing yes or no, but we can't do yes or no questions in direct examination, right? You've learned that. So how do you communicate with her? Well, if you ask Toya a question and you say, Toya, could you spell your first name for me? She'll look up, yes. First letter, is it the beginning of the alphabet? No. Middle of the alphabet? No. End of the alphabet? Yes. And then you start R, S, T, U, and give her the letter. When you hit on the appropriate letter of the word that she's trying to spell, she looks up. So S, T, and that's how she communicates. So my partner and I had to learn to communicate with her in this fashion, just to ask her questions about what had occurred. She had never been interviewed by the police because the police couldn't talk to her. There was a lot of media attention to this case, and it became known as the Girl X case. And maybe when you have time, get online and Google, and you can read the stories about it. So the Girl X case became a very heater case, a very media case, high intense media surrounding this case. Why? For several reasons. A 9-year-old girl who was brutally raped and beaten and left for dead. But not only that, the defendant kept saying, you got the wrong guy, you got the wrong guy, I didn't do this. Just prior to trial, he fired his public defender. You know, Dan, I'm not quite sure how you do that, fire your public defender, but he did. And he got Jenner and Block to represent him pro se. And Jenner and Block had allowed him to speak to the news stations. So I think he was on Channel 9, he was on Fox, he was on all these channels saying he was innocent and we had the wrong guy, we had the wrong guy. And I always said, if you spend 5 minutes with this little girl, you know you got the right guy. And Toya began to tell Bill and I specifics of what occurred that particular day. She didn't know him by name, but she knew him by he was the guy who drew cartoons, because the defendant is artistic, and he used to draw superheroes for the kids in the project building. And the kids knew him because he's the guy who drew cartoons. Didn't know his name, but he would draw Superman, Batman, all the cartoon and superheroes, and the kids would gather around him. So that's how she knew him. She told us specifically what he said to her to get her into that apartment, and that was he offered her fruit. He offered her fruit before going on to school. She told us where he put her on the bed, and all the specifics that were never really known because the police were not able to interview her the way they could have interviewed you and I. So that particular case, we were getting ready for trial. Our intention was not to call her as a witness. We did a lot of research to see if anybody had ever testified in this manner, not just in Illinois, but across the country, and we found nothing. Found one case, I believe, a Tennessee case that it wasn't right on point, but was the closest thing we could find. And we thought about putting her on, but didn't think we'd be able to do it. But then we left it up to her, because she, despite her injuries and despite her physical handicaps, I think her hearing is better than all of ours. She was hearing all these stories on TV. She knew what people were saying, that we had the wrong guy. And she wanted to testify. And we told her to think about it, and it's her decision, and that we would do our best and we would try, and you know, she should think about it. And I remember specifically going to see her on a Friday, and then by Monday morning, the school social worker called us to tell us that Toya said she wants to testify because she wants to be able to tell her side of what happened. So I had the honor of putting her on the stand. It was the most difficult direct examination I've ever done in my life. And I was in the gang unit putting on flippers and, these gang bangers who are lying to me, that sort of thing. So it was intense. I made a mistake, and to this day, Jenner Block thinks I did it on purpose. I did not do it on purpose. It was a mistake. I was asking her the address of where this occurred, and I gave the wrong numbers. Unbeknownst to me, I said the wrong number. I was expecting a yes answer from her, and she answered me no. And I thought, oh my God, that just started, and she's saying, no, I don't. And then I looked down at my notes, and I realized I gave her the wrong address. So I repeated the question with the correct address. She said yes. That one little mistake, and it was a mistake, was effective. And I hope you're thinking like a lawyer. You know why? Because the defense was trying to say that Toya wasn't free thinking, that she was just prepped by us, and she was going to regurgitate whatever I told her to say, whatever Bill and I told her to say. And that one little mistake, though, was important to the jury. Why? Because they saw that she was free thinking. She corrected me. I was wrong. She corrected me. And I got through that direct testimony. She got through that direct testimony, let out a big sigh of relief. Cross-examination was super short. I think the attorney from Jenner Block knew that this was not a witness that he's going to beat up, so to speak. And Patrick Sykes, our defendant, was convicted of the predatory criminal sexual assault and other charges. He was sentenced eventually to the maximum amount of time, which is 120 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. All of his appeals have been exhausted. And I talk about that case because when people ask you the question about why do you want to be a prosecutor, why are you a prosecutor, I talk about that case because I think Toya is the perfect example of why I continue to do this job. And when you have those bad days, and I've had some some bad days, in this position as state's attorney, and you think your world is caving in, and you think about all of this. You think about her, okay, and you think about how this little girl who went through so much physically still had the strength and the stamina to get up there, to testify in her own special way. And till this day, she tells me she'd like to be a writer to be able to tell her whole story, and she remains a part of my life. I see Toya, I go and visit her. She can't live on her own. She lives assisted living, but she has a laughter and a smile that fills this room. And she reminds me each and every day, and that's why I do this job as a state's attorney, and that's why I love being the state's attorney of Cook County. So it's just something that keep in mind, as I say, no matter what type of law you want to practice when you graduate this wonderful institution, keep that in mind. Do something that's going to make you happy. I think I'm going to stop there. I know there's some questions. I do want to shout out, though. I know the Hispanic Law Student Association. Do we have members here? A funny story, my very first week here at Kent, I was standing in the cafeteria in line for something, and a guy comes up to me and he says, "You must be Anita Alvarez," and I'm looking at him thinking, "Who are you? I've never seen you before in my life." He was just a student. And I said, "Well, yeah, why? Who are you?" And he introduced himself. He says, "My name is Yamil Colon. I'm the lone Puerto Rican in third-year class, and I've been looking for you." There were so little of us here at Kent at the time that Yamil created the Hispanic Law Student Society. And then he called us and he said, "Okay, well, you're going to be the treasurer, and you're going to be the secretary, and you're going to be the vice president." And we all had a role because there were probably only 5 or 6 of us here at the time. So Yamil started it. I'm very proud. He was a great resource to have since I was a 1L, and he was already on his way out. But I always remember that. It's a fond memory of Kent, and I hope the Hispanic Law Student Association is going well here at Kent. And again, so thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, and I know we got time for whatever questions you want to ask. Just go ahead.
I think the first question probably has nothing to do with you being a state's attorney. But there is a persistent rumor here at Kent that Professor Kling says you were indeed a Klingon. Can you?
I was not. I worked with David Thomas in the clinic. That's who I worked for David, and I had Mark Kadish for evidence. I was not a Klingon.
So now all of you know that when he says that in class over and over again, it is an untruth.
Some of my friends were, but because I did not work for him in the clinic. I worked for David.
Okay. You're one of the, as you said, you're one of the first, the only state's attorney that ever started as an assistant state's attorney and worked all the way up to the elected office. Mm-hmm. Along the way, you had worked with other people. You worked in teams. You worked with partners. You became a supervisor. So you're probably uniquely situated to be able to look back at all of that experience and say, what are the most important qualities in any individual that was a successful assistant state's attorney?
You hit on team and teamwork. I think being a good state's attorney is being able to be a good partner. You're never alone in the courtroom. You're not. You're always working with other people, and you need to be a good partner, and you need to be there for your partner. But I think some of the qualities that we look for when we're interviewing people, dedication, number one, dedication to do this type of work, being mindful and respectful of the victims at all times. And Dan knows this, sometimes you get witnesses that are difficult, right? In many ways. But you have to have the professionalism to deal with those witnesses. I think you have to be a good listener to be a prosecutor. Because sometimes part of our job is just that. It's listening, particularly when I remember in the gang unit, I'd get a new case in, and I'd sit down with the victim's mother, Sometimes it's a matter of listening to her and letting her vent and letting her cry. And, you know, it's going to take a lot of time out of your day, but it's important. It's important. And you can't just be, you know, short with your victims and your families and your witnesses. You can't. So you have to be compassionate. I think you have to be an excellent team player. You have to be a good listener. Being in court, right, you know, you have to like to be in court. And that all comes part of the job, but it's just one, you know, I guess one factor.
After spending all those years as an assistant state's attorney, I'm sure you got into sort of a routine with your job, and you knew what to look for and where to go and how to do it and how to set goals and how to accomplish those goals. And then you became the state's attorney. What did you find that you had to leave behind as an assistant and pick up quickly as the elected official?
I miss being in the trenches. I miss being in court. Some days I wish I was just pulling my cart to court and being able to cross-examine somebody. I do miss that part of it. I mean, I have tried a case since I've been the state's attorney. You know I can't carry cases like I used to, so I miss that aspect of it. And what do I have to do now that maybe I don't necessarily like? And that's talking to reporters, okay? The media, all right? Dealing with the media. That's the thing that, I mean, it's so much different than being in court. It's so much different than being a lawyer when you have to deal with the media. It's probably one of the hardest parts of my job. I mean, now you have to do all the administrative stuff, budgets, and all of that. But, you know, the unfair criticism, you know, you read something in the paper and you'd say, well, that's not what happened, you know. But the general public doesn't know what the truth is. So that's probably the biggest headache. Mm-hmm.
Was there, when you decided to run for state's attorney, was there a single incident or a combination of circumstances that made you decide, I want to be the state's attorney?
You know, when I saw, you know, when Dick Devine just, you know, said he wasn't going to run, and then I heard the names of the people who were throwing their names out there to run, and I kept thinking, well, you know, I'm more qualified than he is. I'm more qualified than he is, you know, and I just kept, I'm like, I know I could do this job. You know, I know that I've had the experience throughout this entire office, even though I wasn't a county commissioner, I wasn't an alderman, but that's not what's important for the role of state's attorney. You know, I'm not running for alderman, not running for county commissioner. You know, who do you want for state's attorney? I think the public wants someone who knows the job, and so I just felt very strongly that I was the best qualified with the names that were thrown out there.
There's been reported in the media a very increased federal role in policing of gang violence in Chicago. What impact, if any, does that have on your office? You
know, we have a great working relationship with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in fact, when, you know, I've been at other district attorney conferences where I've picked up that other jurisdictions do not, okay? In fact, Dan and I were at a conference in Connecticut where there was actually a lecture about how to get along with your U.S. attorney. And I'm like, well, we don't need that because we get along with our U.S. attorney just fine. So I think Chicago is unique is that we have a great working relationship, and it's not one of those where we're fighting, you know, this is mine, this is yours. So when it comes to the gang stuff, it's great to have a partner like the U.S. Attorney's Office. You know, I think Pat Fitzgerald set the stage, and he was tremendous to work with. And now the new U.S. Attorney, Zach, has been great as well. You know, because when you focus on the guns, which is one of the things that we work with the feds and Project Safe Neighborhoods, we meet on a monthly basis and go over all the gun cases that occur here and decide whether or not they fit under federal guidelines. If they do, cases will go federally. If not, they stay with us. So we have this great relationship to figure out what's best for the case and where it's going to go. We're involved with Project Safe Neighborhoods. Project Safe Neighborhoods is a federal program, And there are parolee forums, so people who are on parole are made to go to these forums where they hear from the U.S. attorney, from the state's attorney, and from police officers and from federal agents to explain to them what's going to happen to them if they in fact pick up another gun or get back in the gang and are out there gangbanging. So it's nice to have them as a partner, and I think we already have a good thing going with them. I know maybe in other jurisdictions they can pick up a little more, but I think what we've been doing helps us. And we've had some success in some areas, certainly not all of them, obviously, but we've had some success with some areas through Project Safe Neighborhoods, and that's hand in hand with our federal partners.
Turning to a domestic violence situation in Cook County, as everyone knows, Chicago now has their own domestic violence courthouse. There are a lot of programs there, as well as a lot of enforcement actions. In the last several years, has your office noticed an increase, a decrease, or about an average of incidents in prosecuted domestic violence?
I wouldn't say we've noticed an increase, but I would say that, you know, there's been all this attention, right, because of the NFL players. Now suddenly there's all this attention on domestic violence. But I'm here to tell you it's always been there, okay? And it's not just, you know, some famous football player. Unfortunately, it happens each and every day. Last year, we serviced 21,000 victims of domestic violence. And so what I've done recently is I combined my domestic violence division and my sexual assault division, because there's a lot of overlapping in these types of crime, but I wanted to make sure that all of my assistant state's attorneys who work in domestic violence or sexual assault unit have the proper training. You know, domestic violence touches everybody. It doesn't matter what community you're from. It doesn't matter you know, whether you have money or not, what your race is. It doesn't matter. It touches everybody. And I have to, I guess I accept the spotlight now, the national spotlight on it, because I think it's getting people to wake up and realize that this exists. Certainly exists here, what we see. The new building, well, it's not quite new anymore, but the building at 555 West Harrison Domestic Violence Court is absolutely beautiful. It's tremendous. And it's a much better place to be able to service victims of domestic violence. I worked domestic violence when I was sent to the 1st Municipal District as a young ASA. It was in an awful place at 13th and Michigan. I mean, and it's awful. You remember 13th and Michigan. Awful. And I had to interview my domestic violence victim. There were no conference rooms, okay? Basically, I'm interviewing her in a hallway and the offender's 2 feet away. Okay, many times she's there with her children. I mean, it was a horrible place to work. So I'm very happy that now the domestic violence, and if you haven't been there, you should go there. It's a beautiful building, separate conference rooms to interview victims. Victims can come in a separate way. They don't even have to see the offender. So we've come a long, long way. One of the other things I implemented was that my assistant state's attorneys take the 40-hour training course that advocates, domestic violence advocates take, because I think it's important. Domestic violence cases are not like other cases. They're just not. There's the dynamics. There's so much involved. You can't treat a domestic battery like you treat a battery that occurred in a bar. Okay, it's not the same. And so it's important that our ASAs and our investigators be trained to give the victims, you know, the attention that they need.
Well, from your comments, you would not then support using 13th and Michigan again as an overflow courthouse?
No. What's there now? I think it's
standing there just ready, willing, and able.
Oh. And the elevator was about the size, like about this size. I mean, it was just a bad place.
One of the things your office has taken a lead in is developing laws regarding sex trafficking in Illinois. Did you encounter any resistance to that? How was the path to that success paved?
You know, when I first took over and we were looking at how we handle these types of cases, we saw a lot of different things. And every prosecutor's office, I think, has experienced this. You know, for example, you know, back then the law was, you know, there was still juvenile prostitution on the books. So what happens if a 12-year-old girl gets picked up for juvenile prostitution, what would traditionally happen? Well, she would be taken over to juvenile court, maybe spend the night, and then the next day she'd be let out. The pimp may have been arrested, and then what would happen? We would expect her to testify against him, and of course, no, none of that would ever happen. So we needed to do a better job as to how we treated these cases, how we looked at these cases. And so the first thing we did was we changed the law and wrote the Illinois Safe Children's Act. The Illinois Safe Children's Act is the most comprehensive in the nation. I say that proudly because it is, and other states are following us. I've sent assistants to help people develop their law in their respective states. And what does that law do? First thing it does is it decriminalizes juvenile prostitution. I mean, juvenile prostitution, the law, those words are no longer in the statute here in Illinois. And why? You know, think about it. You know, a little girl, 11, 12 years old, is not out there prostituting herself, okay? And I'm a mother of 4 children. I have 17-year-old twin daughters. Drama in my house right now, I'm just going to say that, 17-year-old twin daughters who are driving me crazy. But anyway, I digress. But no child is out there prostituting herself. So somebody's putting her out there. Somebody's making money out of this. She's a victim, and she should be treated that way. So we rewrote the statute, decriminalized juvenile prostitution, and decided that in order for us to do a better job of these types of cases is to treat these victims as what they are, victims, and develop cases against the bad guy in a different way. So what has now become known as the Chicago approach was taking what we learned from domestic violence cases and what we learned from organized crime cases. You know, what do we learn from domestic violence case? There's control there. The offender is always trying to control the victim in a lot of different ways. Could be financially, psychologically, with the beatings, whatever it might be. That's what happens in trafficking cases, okay? And what do we learn from, like, organized crime cases? What's the best way to get to these guys, you know? It's not necessarily, you know, how did we get Al Capone, right, on tax fraud? So let's look at how we can develop cases against these guys without just trying to rely on testimony of the victim. So that has now become known as the Chicago approach. And we put our human trafficking unit together, and I'm very proud to say we were the only one of 3 jurisdictions in the country to get a grant to put it together. We have done some tremendous things with the new law, because the new law not only gives us as prosecutors, you know, it gives us new tools, and one of those tools is wiretapping. We can use wiretapping on trafficking cases that we couldn't in the past. And when you think about it, we've always had the ability as local prosecutors to tape someone who's selling drugs but not selling children. That's pretty backwards, right? So the new law gives us that ability with the wiretap. We've had some tremendous operations under the new law. And when you talk about human trafficking, people always think it happens in another country, right? It happens, in some foreign country, or people are brought over and put into this life. That does happen, but that's not all that happens. There are kids right here, born and raised right here, who find themselves, you know, they're vulnerable for many different reasons. Maybe they're homeless, they come from a broken home, whatever it might be, find themselves susceptible to something like this. And before they know it, they are put into this life. Operation Little Girl Lost was the first operation we did using the wiretap. It was the first state wiretap ever used in a human trafficking case. We charged 10 defendants on that case. We learned some horrific things that happened to these women. The youngest was 13 years old, and they were all, and I think the oldest was 19. So we're talking this age group. And many of these girls were tattooed. They were repeatedly beaten. They were sent, there is a term, as long as I've been a prosecutor, I've never heard this term, a term called trunking. And what that is that he throws her in the trunk of a car, locks her in the trunk of a car, and drives around for hours as a form of punishment because she didn't make enough money or she didn't do what he wanted her to do. And so we learned some really horrific things. And I have to say, all the victims in that case are local, born and raised right here. And we see maybe there's girls coming from Indiana or girls coming down from Wisconsin, but that's what we see. And so I'm very proud of our human trafficking unit. I think we need to talk about it more, and we have to increase the awareness to know that it's not just an international thing. It doesn't happen just in foreign countries. It happens right here in our own backyards. The other thing we learned in Little Girl Loss is gangs. Gangs have decided, you know, they graduate to other things. They're not just pitching dope on the corner, right? They're into trafficking now because they realize that it's a moneymaker for them. They feel it's under the radar, and it seems to be older members of gangs are getting into this, and gangs who would traditionally be fighting each other. We're working kind of as business partners, sharing girls, selling girls, trading girls, which was something we didn't know we were going to encounter when we did this operation. But those are some of the things that we're seeing in our human trafficking division. So I'm very proud of what we've been doing. We had another case, another operation out of Schiller Park, which obviously is close to the airport, and Chicago ranks 3 on the hotline for trafficking, the national hotline. Because why? We're a tourist center, a convention hub. So we're ripe for this type of crime.
Traditionally, county prosecutors, state prosecutors have a core responsibility for prosecuting crimes. Under your term as state's attorney, there's been a little bit of a difference there because you've started deferral programs, diversion programs. Mm-hmm. What was the impetus for that move, and has it been successful?
Our diversion programs are very successful. We have more diversion programs than anybody in the country. I think when I took over, we had 7 courts. Now there's something over 30. So we have, you know, everybody always knew about drug school. That was always, you know, a diversion court that's always been there. But there was never anything available on the adult side. You know, juvenile courts run different. The juvenile is run under the theory of balance and restorative justice, and that is not putting these kids into the system, putting them in a diversion program to keep them out. We saw it work well on the juvenile side. And you know, I have been doing this a long time, and I know there are people who are going to continue on that path and become hardened criminals, but I also know there are people that are not. And I also have seen enough of young people get caught up in one crazy thing. And we all know what happens if you have the felony conviction. We all know what happens, you know, about getting a job, about getting into school, about getting financial aid, about going in the military. You know, I mean, they've seen kids 18 years old that suddenly find themselves charged with possession of a stolen car when, you know, they get into a car with a buddy. And so what do you do with, you know, is it the right thing to do to put this through as a felony and have that person take the felony hit, or do we give them a second chance? And I believe we give them a second chance. And so I started our deferred prosecution program to do just that, nonviolent crimes, first-time offenders, nonviolent crimes, and we allow them to go into the program. If they complete everything, then we dismiss the charge. So the charge is dismissed, and they can expunge it, which we all know would be better for them if they want to go on to whatever it is in getting a job. So we've expanded and we keep expanding. I think it's tremendous because, you know, those lower level offenders that we know are not going to continue in the life of crime, and it adds to getting these people out of jail, and we can focus on the most, you know, hardened criminals. I think that's being smart on crime.
Do we have any questions from the door? One last question. One of the shifts we've noticed in the clinic program and through the criminal litigation program is now when students come in, we say, what do you want to do? Almost exclusively, they say, I want to be a prosecutor. Soon, there will be no defense lawyers left for you to worry about. To speak to all of those people that want to be prosecutors, just in a very short paragraph, what should they be doing here to be able to work for you?
Well, I say, obviously, criminal law. Take whatever criminal law class there is, and trial advocacy, evidence. You know, be prepared. And don't be, sometimes we have students that come and interview and they're like, well, you know, they think we're not going to consider them because they worked for the public defender's office or they did this for a criminal defense attorney. That's not the case at all. As I said, I worked for 2 summers for the state appellate defender's office. So that experience is just as good, okay? Because you're staying atop on the criminal laws, you're seeing both sides. It'll help you make a decision. But I say make sure you have, your trial experience, because you're going to be in court, and then whatever evidence in criminal law, forensic evidence, whatever is offered now, that those are the things you should concentrate on.
Okay. Mr. Carreno?
Yes. Ms. Alvarez, if I could get behind the podium real quick, sorry.
Throwing me out. Oh, okay.
So on behalf of myself, as well as the rest of the Criminal Law Society, we really just wanted to show our appreciation and give back here.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, and it was totally unnecessary because Dean Krent knows that whenever he calls me, I say yes. And I always love coming back. I do, because I think, I always say, I'd rather talk to students than politicians. So I just wish you all the best, wherever you're at, whatever year that you're in. You are lucky to be here at Chicago-Kent. It's such a tremendous school, and you're going to get a great education, and you'll have a great career, whatever it might be. Thanks.